Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. That was probably one of the best intros I've had in Adelaide. So that covered pretty much first of all the things I was going to talk about. So I'm done. um, so yeah, I guess a little bit about me. Most everything's been covered already, to be honest. So Eastend Ventures, which is a early stage investment firm. Southern Angels, which is kind of we focus on early stage investing. Before that, if you kind of start going back enough past lives, as was introduced there, we've got I was a commercial pilot for a number of years. I used to do air ambulance, so Royal Flying Doctors, but with a lot more snow and worse weather. And also used to do a lot of not-for-profit work. So if you go back in my early days of IT and technology, I spent a lot of time in homeless shelters, abuse shelters. Used to do a lot of at-risk youth mentoring and that sort of thing, life skills. So did that for many years before I kind of ended up back into oil and gas, and then ended up here. So and that's kind of the question I normally get next is, okay, how did you end up in Adelaide? So I'm just going to, cover that off before anybody asks me that. You know, we actually sold our oil and gas business, right before COVID. Pure fluke, no skill involved in that. I just got lucky. And since then, we basically got stuck. I'm originally from Edmonton, but we spent most of our career down in Houston, Texas. And from there, we kind of got stuck there with COVID going, okay, well, we were going to go to New Zealand. My wife was going to go, do her PhD and master's, and I was going to go be a bum for a bit. And I was really looking forward to that. And then COVID happened, and they said that's not going to happen. So we ended up back in Canada visiting my dad, and thought we were going to go up there for a month or two, and that turned into a year. And eventually, we've said enough's enough, and where are we going to go? So, thankfully, I've been coming to Australia for 20 years. My dad married an Aussie, but I could never get me a visa. So we ended up luckily getting a global talent visa due to some of my past accomplishments, and we decided to come over here. So we kind of ruled out England. We ruled out a lot of things and decided, no, we want to be warm and we want a lifestyle that we love. So we picked here. And then my dad put up his hand, and originally we were supposed to go to Brisbane, and sitting there chatting with him one night, and he kind of says, I'd like to go back to Australia and spend more time there. But I really don't like bugs or hot weather, and I really love wine and golf. Thus, we ended up in Adelaide instead of Brisbane. So didn't know a soul getting off the flight here. Didn't know anyone. But I fully say that obviously I'm here to talk about innovation, but from the Adelaide angle, we've just drank the Kool-Aid, and we are fully Adelaide. This is home for us now. Everywhere we go, we end up looking forward to coming back, and we're not going anytime soon. And the other thing is we also have our youngest son, our only son, is 18 months old and born in Adelaide. He had his Australian passport before he had his Canadian passport. So he is more Aussie than both of us. So we are now committed to Adelaide. But what we're actually here to talk about is actually kind of the state of innovation in South Australia and Australia. So, as a whole, Australia gets a bad rap internationally, but I think there's some phenomenal success stories here, and it's just such an amazing place to grow a company. And the truth is that the record is showing that. So what we're seeing is you're seeing a lot more companies over 100 million be developed in Australia, and that's just exponentially growing every year. Back in the 90s, you have this small little few here, and last year you've got this nice big block. But the myth is that all of those companies are coming out of Sydney and Melbourne. I hear that all the time. It's like, oh, I'm not going to invest in any companies in Adelaide because I got to invest in Sydney and Melbourne. The reality is some of the best success stories, and I'm in kind of that early stage world, so venture capital. Some of the best success stories come from these underserviced regions. You got Canva, that's everyone says is the best success story for venture capital in Australia. Well, that wasn't started in Sydney where they're now. It started in Western Australia. You've got Go One, which is Townsville in Queensland. I think Safety Culture is another small town. Josh always helps me with the town names because I always forget. But yeah, so I mean, there's phenomenal here, and even locally, everyone says, "Oh, I've been successful here," but there's no good companies out of here. And the reality is, there's Energy Exemplar. There's all these ones within the last year that are over billion-dollar exits that were born and raised in South Australia. The other thing that South Australia and some of the, shall we say, underserviced regions has going for it is, for those there's these departments that are called CRCs. They're the cooperative research centers. So the government funded research that comes out of universities and some of these other entities. Now you'd think that Sydney and Melbourne get all the love, so that's where all those would be. Well, the reality is that's not true. Over 50% of these research centers, so over 50% of the new innovation that's coming out of these universities and other research bodies is coming out of South Australia, Western Australia, and Queensland. So it's a huge proportion of the innovation in this country is coming out of these regions. But the problem is although these regions have 50% of the innovation coming out of them, the graph I've got up there, probably hard to read for some people, but what that is that's the early stage venture capital investment per state in 2024. Now there's the first, big red strip that everyone will probably guess is New South Wales, right? And then you've got the next big strip, which by no surprise, that's Victoria. Then you've got the next big strip underneath it, which I ask people in the lunches that we do, who's going to guess what that is? And no one ever gets it right. And that's actually international. So more money flows overseas out of these government sanctioned funds than it does to South Australia, Western Australia, and Queensland combined. So unfortunately, the reality is Queensland's about 6%. South Australia gets 2%, and Western Australia gets 1% of funding. So under 10% of funding goes to the regions that we support, although those regions account for over 50% of innovation that's being developed in the country. Something's not right. The alignment's not there. And that's always, and that the next story I always get is, well, there's nothing happening in Adelaide. Well, what's the old joke? I've heard that the only people that bash Adelaide are the people that have never left or the people that have never been. And there's so much truth to that because, there's so much happening here, but people just don't give it credit. And, so this is the fun slide that I've always put up there. But what happens because of 90% of the funding is going to Sydney and Melbourne is you get all these investors basically fighting over these deals and the valuations go up and it's very unrealistic. And you end up with companies that really aren't worth much that are getting huge valuations and these big checks just because you have, basically, the stats are there's about 150 early stage investing firms in Australia. 140 of them are in Sydney or Melbourne. So I kind of jokingly say, and I'm kind of detouring here a little bit, but I was speaking with the government. We were doing our approvals last week, and I jokingly say that as a business owner, I love the fact that I have no competition. As a South Australian, I'm pissed off that there's no competition because there should be more people doing what we do and competing and supporting the companies that we're supporting. Nope, I didn't realize that was. So what does the South Australia specifically look like? So I think South Australia, you see a lot of headlines, right? You get, gather round, you get live golf, you get, those are always the big things. Those are world-renowned events that are happening right here and that should stay here. You also have South Start, which is kind of voted one of the best technology and innovation conferences in Australia that most people have never heard of unless you're very deeply in that industry. But behind the headlines, and you also got the headlines of, I think it's been every few weeks that we get another award of most livable city, happiest city, unless you're driving. But pretty much, there's always something coming out in the news of how great Adelaide is. But what happens is behind the headlines, there's a lot of phenomenal organizations that are supporting innovation in South Australia. You have the Australian Space Agency. You have the Australian Institute of Machine Learning, which is one of the world-renowned AI institutes. And anybody that's kind of in that field, I still talk to a lot of my colleagues in North America. They're like, "Oh, you're in Adelaide. Oh, you're right next door to AMO then." I'm like, yes, I am. So, these are world-renowned. I know Adelaideans won't realize it, but the reality is people around the world know of these institutes, and they're doing great things at a world stage. You also have Lot 14. You have the Adelaide University with the merger, which, it's gone from, two fairly significant universities to, I believe, one of the largest in Australia. So, that is going to have some commercialization and other impact. But even before the mergers, there were so many groups within those universities that did phenomenal things. Think Lab and all of the different agencies that do a lot of work, do great work for the innovation ecosystem. And also you have kind of the Adelaide, biomed city, which is kind of a big precinct around the new hospital there. And I could have put that, actually. I'm going to go there. So yeah, you have a lot of these. You have kind of Lot 14, you have the Med City, you have all these, and that's just in Adelaide proper itself. But if you're going back, I mean, we kind of touched on this, but due to this, the amount of universities and kind of things, the commercialization and the innovation that comes out of these, it's not just the CRCs that I talked about. It's the students, it's the professors, it's at our company in Southern Angels, we've invested in students right out of school, but we've also invested in universities that got tired of the commercialization and want to do their own thing. So the universities play a huge role, but there's also a lot of industry leaders here across those space. I mean, Adelaide does phenomenal work in the biosciences, but it's also starting to see a lot of traction in both defense and other deep tech industries that most people aren't aware of. Energy Exemplar, I got to pick on Glenn as an example. Most people didn't even know that one existed until it hit the news that they just sold for 1.7 billion or whatever it was. But the reality is, if you go down some of the streets, you'll start knocking on and seeing a lot more of those companies than you ever thought possible, that they don't ever even hit the radar until basically they've sold out. Touched on that. And kind of the innovation precinct, everyone always asks me that. We do believe that Lot 14, regardless of your any political leanings, has the potential to be an impressive innovation hub. Now that they've got their they've got the occupancy for the tower behind, and that's going to start being built. We truly think that's going to be really a phenomenal hub. Currently they have Stone and Chalk, which is a lot of very early stage companies, and that's always mixed reports, if I'm being honest with everyone. But the reality is there are great companies that go through there, but the focus of any of those companies that go through there should be, we don't want to be a startup, we want to be the next big business. And I think that's the kind of the mentality that needs to be fostered to create that. But not only in Adelaide, the other thing we have is, around South Australia is, there's so many innovation hubs that are not only around the CBD here, but throughout the state in general. And all of these are connected. They all talk. They all share ideas. Both, Josh Garrett knows this world a little bit better than I. I mean, as the founder of Southern Angels, he's been in this world in South Australia much longer than I have. So he has a deep relationship with pretty much all of these organizations, and they're always communicating, and we're always trying to figure out how we can help them kind of get to the next level. So the thing that they need to get to the level is, I'm kind of going to put on my, I look at it from a lens of, my experience and expertise, which is, how do we get them the capital and the resources and the everything they need? So in my world, that's, I've, as a director of Southern Angels, as well as, an operator of a early stage investment firm, everything's very capital focused. And, the biggest complaint that I hear when talking to Adelaide-based innovative companies is, we would love to do more here, but we can't get investment. Again, with 140 of those early stage investors being in Sydney or Melbourne, the reality is there's just not boots on the ground here, people going out and meeting these companies, talking to them and investing in them for them to succeed. So what happens is most of them end up going Sydney, Melbourne. They just move because they need money. They can't pay the salaries that's required to attract the senior development talent and the talk technology talent that they need. So they have to go elsewhere for funding. And that's really the mission that we're trying to solve. I mean, when I moved here, we invested in about 12 companies just ourselves, just because we wanted to, see if this would make sense. And it did. All of those companies are doing extremely well, and all they needed was the right tools to succeed. So those tools, you basically have three options when you're an innovative early stage company. You have direct investors, so your high net worths that want to come in and contribute time and money to help you grow. You have basically institutional investors, so funds, things of that nature. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, there's just none here. And you have angel groups like Southern Angels. Now, as far as formal groups, Southern Angels is really the only formal angel group in South Australia. There are a number of private groups that float around, the dinner club type things and the WhatsApp groups that all try and connect things. And those are great, highly encourage those. But as far as formal groups that are actually introducing people, there's very few here. Um, the flip side to that is, if you don't have those formal groups, you basically have to go to venture capital. And I don't know about you, but venture capital gets typically a bad name in the media and everything because most people will say, "Oh, you're venture capital? Oh, you're just gambling people's money." I get that all the time. The reality is, taking all the stigma aside, venture capital is purely just investing in early stage companies when they don't have access to that money. It's nothing more than that. Whatever model you want to take from the US and Shark Tank and all that, that's not what we do. What we do is purely just helping these early stage innovative companies grow. The one benefit that I guess a fund has is you get a lot of tax benefits as a fund. So Australia does a phenomenal program which is called the ESVCLP program, and what that is early stage venture capital limited partnership. And what that is basically you can invest in these funds, and any of your investment, as long as they meet certain criteria, which is quite broad, it's basically tax free. So you don't pay capital gains or any kind of income tax on those investments. So Australia has done a phenomenal job at setting up these this legislation that allows people to get the tax benefit to invest in innovative companies, but a lot of people just don't know it exists, right? So, and the other thing, and that's mainly because, again, there are no funds in South Australia. We talk to other fund managers in Sydney and Melbourne, and they don't even bother coming to South Australia to fundraise because they're like, oh no, we spend 2 weeks trying to educate people what an ESVCLP is, and then we have to leave. So they've just given up even coming here because even they don't want our money and they don't want our companies. So that's essentially why I'm so passionate about South Australia, is making sure that we kind of rectify that situation. So kind of diving into details a little bit. So I mean, the two things companies that we have that support this is Southern Angels, and again, Josh is sitting at the table there. James is guest today as well. I mean, he's really the driving force between Southern Angels. I just kind of sit on the board and try to stay out of his way. But the reality is, he's grown that group from, I think we're over 50 members now. I mean, when you started, it was next to nil. They've deployed over 12 million. Is that right now? 12 million across, what are we up? 30 companies now? 36 companies? Yeah, see, again, got to have him. But so this group, so what Southern Angels and these groups is, they're basically matchmaking services. So they're not an investment group. So what they do is they basically try to connect these innovative early stage companies with capital. And so what Southern Angels does is we'll hold a meeting once a month. They'll have 2 companies pitch, and we'll try and connect them with the right investors. And hopefully these companies, obviously get investment, but also get kind of potentially some mentorship and some other people that want to come along and support these companies. We get a lot of people that, hey, I've sold my business and I was a marketing expert, now I'm bored and still want to give back. And so they will direct invest into these companies and also support them along the journey. And it's been, I mean, honestly, if it wasn't for Josh and Southern Angels, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I normally kind of joke and start things with, I started investing in one company when I met Josh, and then I woke up one morning and had 12 and went, oh crap, I guess this is what I do for a living now. So I blame Josh for my current life. But it's a great life, and Southern Angels does a great job at connecting those individuals. The other hat that I wear is Eastend Ventures, and what we do is we invest from a fund level. So what we do is it's more like a typical investment where we take other people's money and then we deploy that to companies. So it's a little bit different in the sense that you're not looking for angel investors to mentor. We actually hire people, employ people that we can parachute in to actively help these companies and go from there. And so yeah, we've done really well with that, and we're continuing to do really well. And we're, the only thing I want to say is, we're actually going to be South Australia's only ESVCLP as of maybe tomorrow. It's probably in committee meeting right now whether we get approved or not. So from there, and then really it's just about helping early stage companies at a fund level versus an angel level. But really, the innovation in South Australia really needs capital, and I don't care how you do it. If you can, mentor people, if you can convince people, if you can get involved, I mean, these are the things that these innovative companies need. They need mentorship, and they need basically, people helping them align capital so that they can actually see their dream come to fruition. And there is success stories in South Australia. I picked on Energy Exemplar, but Southern Angels, the example that we have for Southern Angels is a company called GPN Vaccines. We had a number of Southern Angels members invest in that, and thanks to this company, I think most of them will be buying new beach houses based on a $25,000 check. So, but a lot of those other people have also gotten actively involved and helped companies like GPN and these other companies kind of reach their goals. So success can happen in South Australia. It does exist. We just need more people believing it and helping them. Yeah, that's it.